Gabe, I was browsing Netflix on Friday night, as one does, and I found a cool new feature that I don't know if you've seen this, and I don't know how new it is. I think it's been out for a few months, but new to me. But it's called Fast Laughs. Have you seen this?
I have not. I'm
I'm
curious
on
what
it.
it is, though. Tell me
I'm
all
on
about
it
it.
right. Yeah, I'm on it right now. Like I'm not even paying attention to the podcast. I'm swiping through. But what it is, it's basically the UI. And when I say basically, I mean it's like an exact copy of the TikTok UI. And it's a tab on the Netflix app. And when I scroll through the content, it's like little previews of content on Netflix. So it's almost like a trailer, but it's a specific clip. And you can scroll through them. You can just keep swiping just like you do on TikTok. But you can also, like it. The like button says LOL. But then you can add it to a list. You can share it. So I can like send this to you on Snapchat. I know you use Snapchat. I can
Oh,
tweet
yes.
it to
Huge
you.
Snapchat guy.
Yeah, it kills me because when I saw this initially, I was like, I opened up the Netflix app and like for some reason it didn't click in my brain, and I was like, okay, I'm on TikTok, and I started swiping, and then suddenly I noticed, man, there's a lot of Netflix content on TikTok today, and then I realized it's not TikTok, it's legitimately Netflix. But I will put Fast Laughs away. But what do you think about that, Gabe?
I mean, I think it's pretty brilliant, actually, because it's, I mean, them stealing the UI aside, maybe that's not
It's
cool.
an exact
Although I
copy too.
suppose
It's like
imitation
not
is
even,
the
they didn't hide
highest
anything.
form of flattery. They just straight up took it, huh?
They did. I download the Netflix. I mean, you've got the Netflix app. I know that.
Yes, I do have Netflix app on my
But
phone. I haven't noticed it, but what I think is interesting about that is I think it's really smart by Netflix because they're clearly leaning into how people want to watch video. So people are getting very used to seeing vertical video sized for their phone on TikTok, on Facebook stories, on Instagram stories, on Reels. And so they're leaning into that aspect of people now very much used to seeing video in that way. And I think it's really interesting that you honestly thought you were on TikTok and didn't realize that you were in the Netflix application. I wonder too I wonder if you like one of the trailers, if that automatically will add it into your recommendations engine, or, if you share it, same thing. I wonder how that data part of it works too. Now I'm curious.
we've got to find out. So I'm just going to go in here and let's see here. I'm just swiping through content here, but I'm going to go ahead and like one of these. And Gabe, I'll follow up with you in a few days. Maybe the next podcast we can dive in and see what my Netflix recommendation looks like. But I just liked The Other Guys, which is actually a pretty funny movie. It's no Hot Rod, but I liked it. So let's see if my recommendations change and whatnot. You can also add it to your list, but I really like it. I don't know if I will use it too much, but if you ever get into like one of those phases where you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what to watch on Netflix, like what am I doing with life? One of those, midday crisis kind of situations, scroll through content, see what you like to watch. But I think it's a great way to preview content.
Yeah, that is a really interesting way. And I wonder if they'll start to create more specific content for that size of video going forward as well, rather than, trying to just repurpose content that they already have. But if they'll actually create new video content for that type of application, it's going to be interesting. I think it's a really clever idea.
Oh, absolutely. And we made the comment like, oh, this looks like TikTok, and it does. I'm not going to shy away from that. But, I think it's funny because a lot of people took what TikTok is doing, that scrollable content, that, 1080 by 1920 content, and just kind of built it into their app. You can do it on Facebook now. You can do it on Instagram. They have Instagram Reels. It's the same thing, not as fun, but so many apps are doing this. Snapchat has their own kind of thing, but Snapchat just kind of has trash content, if we're being honest, in terms of creator content. But I think it's funny that everyone's kind of looking at this new format and adapting to it or building it in. I think we could definitely make a whole podcast episode on this in the future, to be honest.
I agree. I think it's a really interesting topic and something we should probably talk about in the future. So we'll put it on the list of things to future podcast episodes.
Talking about TikTok, I could do that, Gabe.
I know you could.
Well, TikTok and Netflix aside, Gabe, what's on the agenda today?
Yes. So today we wanted to talk about customer journeys and specifically thinking about some of the activities that happen even maybe before the traditional customer journey starts. I know a lot of us have probably built out journey maps and, thought about all of these different touch points that our prospects go through as they're trying to figure out whether they're going to become a customer. And then all of the touch points that happen through their journey with us, hopefully all the way to a topic that we've talked about a lot, advocacy. But what we wanted to do today is kind of build off of an article I read recently. And this is from a person, her name is Caitlin Burgoyne. She runs a company called Customer Camp. And we'll include the link to go check out this article in the show notes. Great article. And frankly, just a great blog and a great newsletter to read as well. She's really interesting and really brilliant. And I think talks about some very interesting topics. And one of these is this idea of trigger events. So these are events that happen pre-traditional customer journey that push people to end up looking for a specific product or service. And Zach, as we were kind of talking, prepping for the podcast, we were talking about these different things that could kind of happen in your life. And I know you mentioned one of them of, graduating from college and kind of moving out and, looking for specific things that you needed to furnish a house or apartment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think with this example specifically is, Casper mattresses. Someone's always like at some point in your life, you're buying a mattress, like it has to happen unless you're like, camping in the woods someplace. But, when I graduated college, it was the same thing. It was, okay, cool. Like I now have an empty house. Like where do I, where do I even begin? Like how do I survive now? So it's the 100 text to mom and dad, like, hey, like, how do I do X, Y, and Z here? What am I doing? But it's really, you've got to buy stuff for your house. I've got to buy that mattress. So one of those events is, graduating, Gabe. That's one of the events you can advertise, you can appeal to people on.
Absolutely. And other ones that you can think of are getting married. Some of these big, these are big life events, right? Getting married, having a kid, graduating from college. These are large life events, maybe even getting divorced. Maybe you need a mattress there as well.
I feel like as bad as that is, someone's going to need a mattress. So definitely an advertising opportunity, sadly, but
it definitely is. Yeah, it made me sad, but this kind of builds off of this idea in marketing of jobs to be done. And the idea behind that is that we're not, when you're a prospect looking for a product or service, you're not looking for a specific product or service. You're looking to basically hire something to do a job for you. And the classic example of this is people don't buy a 1/4-inch drill bit, they buy a 1/4-inch hole. They're buying the outcome there, right? They're not yes, they're buying a 1/4-inch drill bit to drill said 1/4-inch hole, but what they're really doing is they're hiring a drill bit and a drill to drill a 1/4-inch hole for them. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to build off of there. And the article that we're kind of talking through here around Casper specifically, I think is a really interesting use case, or a really interesting case study, I should say, for this. And when Casper started, they were a small company. They were competing against very large companies with very large marketing budgets. And so they needed to think differently about how they were actually going to market to their customers. So what they did was they conducted interviews and talked to customers. And one of the things that they realized through those conversations with customers is that people would wake up in the middle of the night and they would be having a bad night's sleep. And they would start Googling things around, how to sleep better, better mattresses, these sorts of things. And so Casper really leaned into that and started to do search engine optimization for some of these keywords. They, started creating content for these people. Zach, I know you actually looked at some of the Google trends around mattresses as well, which I think is, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about Google trends, just because I think it's a really interesting topic.
And I just love Google trends to begin with. Again, that's a whole nother topic, but there's so much data in Google trends. And what Google trends is it's basically tracking, what are people looking up on Google? What is the data? And you can use this data. You can go on. I went on and typed in, mattress. And I thought it was pretty funny because there's a couple things of data you'll get. One is you'll actually see the rankings. And one of the rankings and it goes by date too. So you can go, I think, back to like 2005 or something crazy like that. I didn't know they had internet back then, but I went back to like 2005 and had this long history of, people typing in mattresses. And I thought it was funny
Hmm.
because one of the biggest spikes was actually in April 2020, right around the pandemic, you know? So suddenly you have this pandemic and people are looking up mattresses, you know? And then to go off that too, it also breaks it down by location too. So the number one, uh, at this time, the number one location for people looking at mattresses was New York, ironically enough. And then the number two was Utah, and so on, so on. But you can actually go in and see the search interest over time and see, okay, when are people actually looking this up? Historically, what has that been? But Google Trends also gives you some more live data too. So you can use that data when you're doing exactly what you mentioned, Gabe, is seeing when people are buying mattresses, or what are they typing in, or what are people looking up. And
Yep.
if you can relate that to your business, that's exactly what you want to do, is take that data and then build an ad appealing to those people who might be looking up something maybe completely different, but still somehow applies to your business.
Yeah, for sure. And what I think is really interesting too about that whole Google Trends piece, and April 2020 being a huge spike, what was happening then? People were stressed, right? I think that was a very stressful time for many people, and so they probably weren't sleeping very well. So they were probably Googling things like, how can I sleep better, how to get better sleep. And Casper ranks really high for all of these things from an SEO perspective, and they actually have on their blog tips and tricks to help you sleep better. So, as we talk more about the buyer's journey, but maybe people aren't ready to necessarily make a mattress purchase at that exact time, but when they are, they're already going to be familiar with Casper as a brand and as a name, and so they're going to have that familiarity with them. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting from this article is that because they realized that people were, waking up in the middle of the night and Googling these things, they did actually start running ads specifically during those time frames. So they would run ads basically at 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. So if people woke up and were scrolling on their phones or looking for this stuff, they would see a Casper ad. Now, again, they probably weren't at a point where they were actually going to make a purchase at that exact moment. 3 a.m. is typically not the time that you're going to be making, $1,000 purchasing decisions. At least maybe you shouldn't. But what they would do is they would then retarget those people maybe later, the next day or maybe the day after, to remind them, at a time when they were maybe in a better place to actually be able to make a purchasing decision. But they would go back and retarget those folks, which I just thought was brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about getting that thought into someone's head. And I made the joke, 1 to 3 a.m. Who's complaining about not being able to sleep then? That's, the night is young at that time, right? But it's funny because we also, in our day-to-day conversations we have, Gabe, is we typically don't recommend advertising at 1 a.m., But I think in this Casper case, they took the data they knew. They said, hey, people are Googling, sleep issues at this time. How can we appeal to them? And I think they did a fantastic job with that.
I agree. And yeah, typically you're right. We wouldn't be telling people to advertise in the middle of the night. It's obviously not a lot of folks are going to see that, but in this specific situation, it worked. And to bring this back to a broadband service provider, example, the industry that you and I work in, Zach, I think potentially looking at running ads at times when customers are dealing with pain, as an example. So if you're talking about buffering, or if you're talking about having a poor internet experience, my guess is that most people are going to be experiencing that during the evening hours, when everybody is home, everybody's online, everybody's trying to do something on their tablets and their phones, kids are gaming, mom and dad are trying to stream something from the TV. That's when that pain is going to be the most problematic. And so if you are a broadband service provider, trying to run ads at folks like that, during the evening hours is probably a great time to do it, because it's going to be during the time of day where they're actually having that particular issue.
Yeah, and to that point, Gabe, too, is I think that's a great family example. I don't know, I think, but like I think of my case too, and you said, oh, you've got kids streaming, people using this bandwidth. For me too, I look at it as when do I use my phone? Typically, that's when I come home from work. After that 5 o'clock time frame, maybe I'm cooking dinner, eating dinner, whatever that is. That's when I'm going to be on my phone too. But you can use that data of, hey, when's my audience active, whatever that case may be. I know they're on their phones, and try to appeal to them during those times too. So I think it's a great example, though, if you know you're having issues with bandwidth and kids streaming and whatever that situation may be. is know what time that's happening and get that awareness event right there.
Yeah. And if you don't have support staff to be able to, be there when you're, if maybe you don't have an evening sales team, right? What you could do is do very similarly to what Casper did, run those awareness ads in the evening to, kind of turn up the pain, turn up the contrast, and then retarget those people during your normal business hours when you are going to have folks that are ready to actually take that order. So I think you could very much take that example and, use what Casper did there in as a broadband service provider, thinking about some of those other, BSP specific trigger events, certainly moving, buying a home. Obviously, if there was a bad experience with your previous service provider, those types of events are going to trigger somebody into what I think of as the kind of the traditional customer journey.
Yeah, absolutely, Gabe. I think there's a lot of data on that, especially with social media and the amount of content people post on social media. We mentioned the relationship statuses and people, flocking to Facebook to use those. But I think that's another great opportunity there. Maybe not so much with BSP, but looking at that Casper example, they leveraged a lot of that data and did exactly what we just talked about. So a lot of data, just a matter of how you can use it.
Okay, Zach. So I got to ask you this, since we're talking about relationship status on social media.
My mom
have
listens
you ever
to this
posted
podcast.
Your relationship? I'm not going to get too. We're not going to get too crazy here. I'm just going to ask you: have you ever posted your relationship status on social media?
Jokingly, the answer to that is never had anything to post. But the honest answer is I have not. Like, joking aside, I've posted photos and that kind of stuff of relationships and whatnot, but not once have I ever thought like, oh, is this Facebook official? It's just not, it's not something I can bring myself to do. Gabe, if I go to your Facebook right now, is it going to say you're married, or what am I going to see?
No, there is no information on my Facebook. My Facebook is so boring. The only thing I use it for is work related stuff. So I also,
that's LinkedIn,
not
man.
That you asked, but I'm just going to tell you anyway. I know, but my Facebook is super boring, man. I pretty much just use it for work stuff. I have Instagram, and that's where more of the pictures of my kids and my wife and things like that go. But I actually don't post that much there either. But my wife and I have been together for a long time. And we were together before there was such a thing as Facebook. So I never got the opportunity to, determine whether it was Facebook official or not when we first started.
Oh man, you got lucky.
I've never had the pleasure of posting a relationship status.
Well, the problem with that, Gabe, is you posted, everything's happy, everyone's commenting, yay, good for you, round of applause and everything. But then not to bring the podcast down, but there's a point when you might have to remove that. And that's when people start, asking questions like, oh, he changed his Facebook status, he changed his image. But one of the things I've always thought was complicated, and I don't know if this is still a thing because I refuse to put my relationship status on Facebook. Maybe when I'm engaged and married, and that seems like a big enough event, but there's an option for it's complicated. And I just can't wrap my head, why would you want people to know that, I think there's a point on Facebook when you overshare content. To your point, you use Facebook
Agreed.
for business stuff a lot, which is, not quite the intention of Facebook, Gabe. We got to get you, caught up to speed here. But I don't use Facebook that much. I post photos when I'm traveling, hiking, stuff like that. And that's really all I post. A lot of my content is on Instagram, So while I'm not deleting relationship statuses on, Facebook or Instagram, occasionally you might see a photo disappear. But remind me of this whenever the time comes, but I will not put my relationship status on Facebook because I don't want to be advertised.
I'm going to remind you of this someday in the future.
I don't want to be advertised based on my relationship status. That's what I'm going to tell people. But anyway.
Well, so we were talking about this, and I think this is a topic probably for another podcast. So we'll put a pin in it here and we can talk about it later. But this idea of trigger events and trigger events around changes in your relationship, I think are really interesting too. And Facebook actually has a bunch of targeting that you can do around life events. So you can target people who recently got engaged, recently got married. And, maybe those are folks that would actually make sense for a mattress ad, to bring this full circle to the Casper example. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do there around life event targeting that I think would be an interesting topic for the future as well.
Absolutely, Gabe. We definitely need to touch on that because there's so much opportunity there. Even
Yeah.
with moving, buying a new house, whatever that is, like
Hmm.
there's always something that will appeal to someone. Like I mentioned, like when I graduated, I was I posted that on Facebook. I definitely said like, graduated, and people commented on, but like Facebook totally could have like taken that information and be like, oh hey, this guy just graduated. Um, you know, Advertisers take this and run with it. Tell them what you want them to hear. But there's so much
Yep.
opportunity around that. And again, we'll save that for another podcast episode because we could talk for a while on that. People like talking about social media.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed. Yeah. It's a good topic. So
So
shifting gears back to the buyer journey, and I just wanted to make this comment really quick about the journey, and then Zach, I know you wanted to talk through some of these specific parts of the journey. But one mistake that I think a lot of people make, and this is discussed in that article I mentioned earlier as well, and I think it's a brilliant statement that Caitlin references, is she says, your customer's journey doesn't revolve around you. It begins long before they discover you and often includes many alternative solutions. And I think that's a really, really brilliant statement because I do think when folks do customer journey mapping, they get very wrapped around the touch points that are happening with their company specifically and not necessarily thinking about the alternatives that the customer went through to bring it back to that jobs to be done thing, the different job they were trying to hire for. And also the fact that, again, thinking about those trigger events, that there's something that probably happened long before the official, and I'm using my air quotes here, customer journey started, that really influenced that person's purchasing decision.
absolutely, Gabe. And typically, what we see is we see companies map this out. You can call it a customer journey map, whatever that may be. And I see a lot of different terms being thrown around. And I've seen these maps in so many different formats. I've seen Excel files. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
I've seen Google Slides, PowerPoints of just people mapping these out. But there's really, the basic steps are always the same: awareness, consideration, the conversion itself, and the loyalty too. So that's your basic step. So we'll walk through each one of these and give some examples. But as we've really discussed today, number one is awareness. There's that's when the customer, whoever that prospect may be, acknowledges that they have a problem or a need to fill. So back to the Casper mattress example. Gabe, I'm gonna go to bed tonight and I'm gonna be thinking like, man, my mattress is uncomfortable. I'm gonna be looking at Casper mattresses now. But that's when you acknowledge that, hey, I've got a need. Something needs to happen here. And and one thing that I think is interesting to point out is oftentimes at this stage you're looking for an answer to a question. You may not be doing the actual buying process. You may not be ready to buy, but as we mentioned, you're looking for some additional information at this point.
Yeah, and this is where content marketing can, I think, be really, really helpful at this point, right? It's the social media posts, it's the blogs, it's ranking for SEO as Casper did. It's doing all of those things to make sure that you are top of mind as a brand when somebody is ready to make that purchasing decision, but also understanding that they're not necessarily at a point where they're ready to buy at that exact moment.
Yeah, and that really leads us into the next stage is the consideration. That's when, hey, like we've defined that the problem exists. Maybe the customer now is, or the prospect, we'll call them, is looking at other options. So if we want to stick with the mattress example now, it's maybe you've seen that Casper mattress ad. Maybe you're on Google now saying like, hey, what mattresses exist? Do I want a Sleep Number? Do I want this? What exists? So that's really when you're out there looking around. And I think a great tool to use for us now is when someone's in this stage, landing pages, the FAQs, what are the benefits of my product? And this kind of sneaks into the loyalty a little bit, but word of mouth advertising, in the past, Gabe, we've talked about companies like Quip was one, and just people who like, maybe the referral codes and whatnot, but just having that general, like, oh, people are talking about a product, that also leads into that consideration phase.
Yeah, totally. And I know this is a topic that we talked about in the last podcast as well, but just to drill down into this a little bit further, this is also the part where transparency around pricing, I think, is really important because this is the point of the journey where the prospect is likely comparing you to another option. And that's why I think it's so important to be transparent about your pricing and not make you jump through hoops in order to find it. I know Zach and I talked about this last time, but we were discussing the idea of having to put in your service address if you're looking for a new broadband service provider to be able to understand what pricing is even there. I was actually doing some secret shopping with a company who I will not name because they completely drove me insane, but for another project I was working on. And if I wasn't doing the research if I wasn't doing it as a research project for work, I would have been out of there so fast because the experience was just awful. I had to, there were like 3 steps that I had to jump through before I could even get the information. And then once I did get the information, I knew that they were withholding some pieces of information from me about managed Wi-Fi and some of these other components. It was awful. And I just couldn't believe how bad the comparison that I couldn't believe how bad that consideration process was for somebody who was just coming in trying to find internet service. It was just brutal.
Gabe,
being as transparent as possible, please.
You really just answered my next question for you, but hypothetically, 2 products on a page, one has the price, one does not. Which one are you going to click?
100% the one with the price. I mean, at least it's transparent about what that number is, right? And if I've got to go through 4 layers of approval before I can even find the price on the other one, there's not a lot of probability that I'm sticking around for that. And like I said, this was a perfect example of that. And it was an incredibly painful process. And I never want to go through it again. It was brutal.
And to that point, Gabe, is I came from banking finance a little bit. So we talk about rates a lot. But I don't know about you, but do you ever just like rate shop banks? Who's got the best savings interest rates? Who's got, maybe you're taking out a loan, who's got the best loan rates? But I think the same thing applies. Is if I go to a website and they don't have anything about the rates, I'm just going to keep moving down that list, even if the rate was a little bit higher than the competition, you can always focus on what was the customer experience. Maybe they've got fantastic staff, other benefits, but concealing that information is just a huge mistake in my opinion.
You're not going to get me to argue with you there, buddy. I'm very much in agreement with you on that.
We need to find a topic we disagree on someday. That way the whole podcast is us just going, back and forth on whatever that is.
I'm quite certain there's lots of topics we disagree on, but,
but
we will have to find one of those for another day.
Yeah, continuing down the
moving
map,
along,
though.
Conversions.
Yeah, and that's when you're looking at the prospects. They know you exist now. They know who you are. So now you need to basically persuade them to buy whatever it is you're selling. And I think again, this is something we've talked about in the past, and good reason too is customer reviews. And we kind of just alluded to this, but if the price wasn't shown, would you buy it? But now, same thing. If the reviews were there, would you buy it? If it didn't have reviews, would you buy it? But looking to see what other experience people have. I know, every time I, look online for an apartment or something, the first thing I do is, I'll see it on whatever website. I'll punch it into Google, and I can see all the reviews now. So I can see what people like, what people don't like. But it's the same thing for any product is what do people say about this product? And just about every page online, if you're buying something, has that customer feedback. It says, people who bought this are saying, whatever that it is about this product.
Yeah. And in an ideal world, how has this positively impacted their lives, right? Especially if it's something where you're going back to that jobs to be done thing. What job am I hiring this product or service to do? And is it actually going to be an improvement in my life? So I know we've talked about customer reviews a lot, but yeah, it's that advocacy piece cannot be overstated in how important it is in this part of the buyer's journey to get people to convert. Certainly having really clear calls to action and creating some urgency around actually making a purchase are, great ways to drive conversions here as well once you've got people through to this part of the journey. But, having those customer reviews, having those clear calls to action and creating some urgency are certainly great ways to drive people through this part of the journey for sure, or the funnel.
Yeah. And there's also the component of how do we entice someone to buy the product too? And what we see a lot is offering the discount code or maybe a trial option too. I know a lot of software websites will say, hey, here's a 7-day trial, and then you get billed or you forget to cancel, whatever that is. But I think having that discount code too is hey, sign up now and 25% off, whatever it is we're selling. But that's another way to kind of loop people in. They know you exist. Why should I buy from you? Oh, 25% discount, something like that also
Yep.
entices people to make that final decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And then certainly think going back and I think analyzing the data after the fact as well, for those people that did take that discount code, did they end up being good customers? I think that's a really important part of the process that probably doesn't get analyzed enough is, I'm a big proponent of customer lifetime value as a really important metric that you need to be looking at. And, if I did offer a discount to get somebody in the door, did they end up becoming a valuable customer long term over their entire customer life? So that's I think a really important point with discount codes and things like that is to go back and measure the results after the fact to make sure that you are bringing in high quality customers.
And speaking of high quality customer, Games, that brings us to the last step.
Oh, look
And
at that lead in.
that's the yeah, how about that? We didn't plan that at all. But it's the loyalty. Yeah, cool. We've got this great buying process. We've got the customers now, but how do we spread that? How do we retain them? How do we kind of let people know that we've got this loyal customer base? And there's actually a study by Salesforce, and it said 95% of customers say that trust in a company increases their loyalty. So I think that goes back to the whole experience, from the beginning of this funnel to now. But there's a couple examples that come to mind. Because a lot of companies have some kind of loyalty program. You've been with us however long, or maybe it's a program like a membership kind of thing. But we see a lot of different loyalty programs, and then we see some companies. To name one, I'm going to name Apple, who has a very strong customer loyalty. They have this very strong fan base, very loyal customers. But if you think about Apple, they don't have a single loyalty program at all, right? There's nothing stopping me, your average Apple fanboy, from going out and buying an Android or a Windows PC. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it too. Is Apple's got my trust. They built, objectively a fantastic product, and I think they have that strong loyalty now around that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. I mean, there's no specific program around that, but it does bleed into their marketing. I think the ads that they were running, oh gosh, I guess it was middle to second half of last year, where they were running those TV commercials, and at the end it would have the Apple logo and then the lock that would lock up.
I thought those were
brilliant ads, and the privacy ones, they were great, right? And that was when that's when Facebook and Apple were really punching each other in the face over all of these iOS 14.5 and 15 changes, and how data was going to be able to be tracked in apps that were on your phone. And so they really leaned into that. Hey, we're the company that keeps your data private. And those are the types of things that, yes, it's not a specific loyalty program, but it builds loyalty with their users because they're reminding you of how they're different from the competition.
Absolutely. And I think those ads, it was something like, what happens on iPhone stays on iPhone. But I
Yes,
think Apple
I think
is
right.
one
I think
of those.
that's the tagline.
Yeah, and Apple is one of those companies where I would say more so lately, just because we've seen a lot of the privacy stuff in the news, as you said, with Facebook and whatnot. But they've kind of recognized that if they can build the brand based on privacy and protecting your data, they will see success in that. And I think they already have. Do I buy an iPhone strictly because of that? I would say no, but it's nice knowing, it's nice having that thought in my head, like, oh, Apple's not going to turn around and, sell whatever's on my phone to, some other company. So that's one way, kind of building trust with Apple. The other way is, loyalty programs. Maybe you have something specific to your business that you offer to customers who have been with you, a certain amount of time, or they've done something with you, whatever that event may be. But one that I like to talk about, and this isn't so much something we traditionally see, but are you familiar with the company REI, Gabe?
Familiar with the company. I don't know that I've ever bought anything from REI, but definitely familiar with the company. And I know they've got a very loyal user base or customer base.
And I should be hesitant to call them a company. It's technically a co-op, I believe, if we want to go that route. But if you sign up and you become a co-op member and so on, they've got some loyalty programs built into that. It's 10% back on things you buy from them, 20% off services. So if you need your bike tuned up, whatever that may be, buy and sell, or buy and trade, I should say, used gear you've had. Even if you want to rent equipment too, you can
That's
rent
cool.
it from them. And for those who don't know what REI is, it's very much an outdoors, retailer. They have like really anything you need: rafts, hiking equipment, snow, biking, all of that fun stuff. It's one of my favorite places. They've got one in Colorado. That's my closest one. But that's where I get most of my hiking stuff. But again, become a co-op member, stay loyal, keep buying from REI, and they will pass, benefits back to you. And they have a whole list. We named a couple, but building that loyalty program, they've done a great job at that.
Yeah, that's really cool, especially because people buy like the kayak and then they'll use it 3 times and be like, oh crap, what am I going to do with this thing now, right? So having that, it probably provides a lot more confidence to people when they're purchasing some of those higher ticket items that maybe they can't, if they end up not using them, they can trade them in, or they can trade with somebody else for another piece of outdoor equipment, right? That's a brilliant idea. I love that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And did you buy a kayak that you regret, Gabe? Is that where that came from?
No, I never have. I do not have a kayak that I regret, but I do like kayaking. I used to go with my buddy, with a buddy of mine. Before we'd go actually before work. So this is when I worked in the Petaluma office. There's a nice little spot out by our Petaluma office, and he and I would get up very early.
Did you kayak across the bay?
And we would drop in. No, not the bay. It was like you kind of went down towards the bay, but it was basically like a nice little kind of estuary kind of thing. But anyway, you go super early, and it was really creepy to like be in the water basically when it was pitch black. But then the sun would come up and it would be beautiful. So I definitely like kayaking, but I've never owned a kayak.
Well, what my friends and I did is we bought.
He had an extra one, thankfully.
We bought inflatable kayaks for a while, and it's not just like an inner tube; it's like an actual pretty heavy duty. But we would do that. We'd pack them in our vehicles because you don't have to strap them on top. You could just go. Sunk in 2019, so we had a good run.
Sad times.
But yeah, it
was.
Yeah, but no, I love kayaking. It's a lot of fun. But we used to do a lot of kayak trips. Take the afternoon and go. So highly recommend that if you want to shop at REI. They have a great loyalty program in case you maybe decide a few months from now you don't like kayaking.
Very cool.
Oh man, Gabe. Well, I enjoyed this conversation today, talking about these customer journeys and everything, kind of mapping out these items. What we should have done is we should have built out a map and added that to the podcast notes and shared that with people. But like I said, there's so many different maps you can use online, specific to what objective you're trying to accomplish. So definitely, if you need a map template, look around to find one. It's a fantastic tool to use.
No doubt. There's tons of great resources out there. As I mentioned, we'll link some of the resources to that Customer Camp organization that I think is a really great resource to look at for some of this stuff as well, especially for this whole idea of trigger events. There's just so many great resources out there in the wide world of the internet for us to use and leverage. So we'll definitely link to some of that in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. Well, Gabe, I need to go update my relationship status on Facebook. So I'm just going to quickly remind everyone, follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you're not joining us on Spotify, we've got video on Spotify. And if you want to join us on YouTube, we've got video on YouTube as well. So definitely give us a follow and get notifications when the latest update comes out. Otherwise, Gabe, as always, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Visit our website to send us a message. That's all we have for this week, but we'll be back next week with more. Thanks.